Hey guys, welcome back to today's video. Today is Friday, September 9th, 2022, and today we are going to be talking about the 2022 midterm elections, more specifically focused on the House elections. Now, The Economist has had this forecast, I believe, for just a little while, but they updated it today, and it showed that in this forecast, the Democratic Party is in a quite favorable position going into the House elections. Now, unlike many other forecasts, they give the Democratic Party about 212 seats, only about 6 seats away from the needed amount to hold the majority. Now, I will say and preface this video by telling you that I extremely expect the Republican Party to win control of the House. I have treated it as a foregone conclusion, and that is the way that I want you to see this from my lens of someone who is expecting it to go red, but there is also still a very slim possibility that it does go blue, a slim possibility that it seemingly come out of nowhere. Now, we are 60 days away from the midterm elections, which means we are in crunch time. We are in the final stretch of the campaign season, and issues of messaging, primaries, etc. are now a thing of the past. The Republican Party is still the favorites to win the majority, but as we will see throughout this video, that might not always be the case heading into the next 2 months. So, the Economist forecast, what does it tell us? Well, it says on the House level that the Republican Party has a 75% chance at winning the majority, and that's very similar to the forecast that we see on 538, 74 versus 26. But the difference here is more so in the seats and the expectations for either political party. Republicans on average are about 227 seats on the 538 forecast, but on the Economist, they hover a little bit less, around 223. Now, it may seem as if it's just off by a few seats. Why is that so significant? Well, oust the House Democrats back in 2020 when they won the majority by just 4 seats. Yes, a few seats can make all the difference, and in an election that is expected to be so exceptionally close over the next couple of months, well, every single seat does in fact matter. The Democrats averaging around 212 also puts them in a position where a narrow increase in Biden's approval or an uptick in the generic ballot truly could narrow up this race to a point where Democrats are now the favorites to win control of the House. I think it's going to be a stretch. I think it's going to be difficult, but if these past special elections have proven anything, it's that Democrats can do what is foreseen as the impossible. Flipping a House seat in the state of Alaska, winning in New York's 19th against an extremely strong Republican contender, doing very well in New York's 23rd, Minnesota's 1st, Nebraska's 1st. These are special election results you would expect to see in 2017, 2018, but never in a national environment such as this one. It also is something to be said about the generic ballot getting better for the Democratic Party over the past month. Democrats now lead by 1.2% nationwide. In terms of Biden's approval, well, that actually is narrowing up as well. You can see here that amongst likely or registered voters, Democrats are within single digits on the overall average, and amongst all voters, or all polls together, Biden is only down by about 10.5%. Still down, still in a point where he is not approved of by the majority of the nation, but amongst those who are probably going to be voting, you are talking being down by a margin of about 8.2%, which is never beneficial, but it also is significantly better than when Biden was down about 20 points nationwide. So, looking at the Economist forecast in a very similar fashion to the 538 one, the chances for the Democratic Party has significantly increased from the start of the model. On June 1st, 2022, the Democratic Party had about a 14% chance at retaining control of the House of Representatives, and 14% was honestly quite good for the Democratic Party at the time. Looking at the numbers now, nearing a point where it is nearly double where it was in the beginning of June, according to 538, is a very good sign for national Democrats. On The Economist, it looks even better. Because looking at the chances, even as recently as August 21st, the Republican Party had an 87% chance at winning control of the House of Representatives. Democrats were at just 13%. And now they're at 25%, nearly double where they were just a few weeks ago. To see the GOP drop off from a point at one time being at 90%, 91%, with Democrats in the single-digit percent chances, less than a 1 in 10 chance, accelerate to over a 1 in 4 chance tells me that the Democratic Party is doing something right. That this recent trend, this recent upward trajectory for the Democratic Party has propelled them to an extent that we had never seen before. Because the forecast from The Economist at one point in time had the Republicans at 234 and the Democrats at 201. Similar to where the 538 forecast is right now, even though the 538 one is more beneficial for Democrats than what these numbers are. But now they have narrowed up pretty significantly. You are talking about a difference here of just 10 seats. Back in 2010, the Republican Party won over 240 seats. In 2014, they expanded on that 240-plus seat majority. The Democratic Party could not even crack 240 in 2018. So to see this race so competitive means that Democrats are doing something right. on the side of the House of Representatives, and it is translating to a very good shot at retaining control of the House, something that, again, was never within the realm of possibility at all prior to. Looking at the betting markets, you also find a very similar story. Democrats on the 22nd of June had 8 cents for their share to retain control of the House. Republicans, on the other hand, were at 92 cents. Today, Republicans have dipped down a whopping 18 cents to 74, and Democrats have upticked pretty significantly 20 cents to 28. It's very similar to the forecast odds on FiveThirtyEight, very similar to the forecast odds on The Economist, and all of it is telling us that the race has gotten better for Democrats. But you knew that. At least you knew that to the extent that you saw the Senate move in a different direction, that you saw the House of Representatives narrow up. So what more are we contributing to the conversation with this expectation? Well, the main thing here is that also if Democrats are able to win 212 seats, it means that 2024 puts the House majority back into play. The problem with the 2010 redistricting era was that the Republican Party had so many major victories that Democrats simply couldn't keep up. It took Democrats 8 years after losing the House majority in 2010 to win it back, only to potentially lose it later 4 years later. So to go from a point where it took you 8 years to a margin such as this one, with a map that the one we have been described by the overall redistricting map, what you are going to see is that the Democratic Party is in a position right now where they are on track to improve and improve and improve in a way that is really unheard of, and also could change the trajectory not only in this midterm, but also in the future midterms. Or presidential elections with coinciding House elections. Sorry about that, my screen recorder cut out, but I was saying, if Democrats go from, let's say, 222 seats now down to 212, it means all Democrats need in a future election, 2024, 2026, should the numbers hold, would be just about 6 seats. It's not unreasonable, especially if years are more beneficial than what is supposed to be a red wave year. The problem for Republicans is that this is the baseline. The Republican Party and Kevin McCarthy and Mitch McConnell have been all up in arms saying, we are going to completely win these midterms. I don't know why anyone's entertaining the idea that Republicans won't, X, Y, and Z. We're going to landslide them. At one point in time, Kevin McCarthy was saying the Republicans were going to win 40 to 50 seats. So when he's saying things like that, you turn around and you look at these numbers and you say, if this is your best type of year, if this is your best type of performance, because Republicans never want to admit that they are losing in these races, even though quite frankly they are, if they don't admit it, and if they try to treat this, or they think of this as a red wave year, or it does end up being the most red leaning year in the 2020s, well, what you will find is that Democrats have a very strong baseline. This national environment in 2010 would have handed Democrats an even more significant loss. This type of environment in 2014 would have handed the Democrats a more significant loss by the president's approval, because it was Obama's disapproval in 2010 by 5 points that led to a 63-seat pickup. Yes, it was also Obamacare, but that isn't to say that Biden and the Democrats haven't pushed through some of the more expansive projects that could have only been promised with a significant House majority and Senate majority, that they did so with such a narrow majority, the narrowest possible and the narrowest of the 21st century. It is crazy to think about, but it's what happened. And voters have every reason to push back on Biden by national numbers, except guess what? The Democrats not only are outperforming where 2010 Democrats were and 2014 Democrats were, but also they're setting themselves up for future victories. The Economist forecast really puts us into a really big shock, too, about what a 75% chance actually translates to for the GOP. When Democrats had about a 75 to 80% chance at winning control of the House in 2018, that put Democrats in a position of them winning 235 seats. If Republicans have a 75% chance and they only have 223 seats by this forecast, or by the FiveThirtyEight forecast of 227, again, what does that mean for future elections? What does that mean for national and local Democrats and Republicans as they look to the future? I think all around, these House forecasts narrowing up are a story in itself. But The Economist showing us such a narrow majority also means that The Economist might know something that we don't. We have been watching these special elections in New York, Minnesota, Nebraska, Alaska, even regular elections in Kansas that are telling us, hey, the tide is shifting. At what point in time does our rhetoric become, this is now a good year for Democrats, rather than a good year for Republicans or just a mediocre year for either political party? I think it's a big stretch to get to a point where we eventually say that Democrats are leading nationally. I think that's a big jump, and it's not going to come easy, and it shouldn't come easy because, quite frankly, it's quite a charged statement, especially knowing where we were just a few months ago. And a lot can change in the final 60 days, but I wouldn't count it out yet. I will say, again, to reiterate, as I said in the beginning of this video, the Republican Party, I still think is the favorite to win the House, and so does 538, so does The Economist, and so does the betting markets, and practically everybody else. Quite frankly, the generic ballot right now isn't good enough for Democrats for them to retain control of the House. Because if you recall, back in 2020, they led by 7, won by 4. If Democrats won the national generic ballot by about 4 points, and that only translated to 222 seats, well, what happens when they only win by 1 point? I mean, you start to see the math there, doesn't really check out for the national Democrats. But the question is, does this increase? Does the Democratic Party's share in the generic ballot start to uptick and uptick and uptick? Because if it does, then yes, it does mean that Democrats do have a viable chance at the House majority. But as of right now, with a 1.2% lead, I wouldn't count on it. But I would count on future elections. I would say that we could absolutely see Democrats regain control of the House a lot quicker than they did in 2010 to 2018, because 8 years is a significantly long time. Again, too, looking at our House map, the redistricting really favored the Democratic Party in a way that it hadn't in the past. It was enough so that the Democrats are looking at it from the perspective of, these are races that we have gerrymandered essentially themselves into a strong enough position that they can withstand wave years like this one. I mean, we also can't ignore the Dobbs effect having a super big impact on it. But what I will say is that Democrats would not even be in such a competitive position going into these midterms without fighting fire with fire. In 2010, Democrats practically gave up, and they lost a bunch of notable seats that they needed to hold in order to do redistricting in their way. But I will say the Democrats did not back down in 2020's redistricting year. What they did was push forward with maps that were honestly quite extreme in some states. It's not to say the GOP didn't do that. They absolutely did, and they definitely have done it a lot more than Democrats simply because they've gotten more power by gerrymandering themselves back into power. That's how the political system works. Both parties do it, but Republicans disproportionately, again, because they got a jump start on it. But Democrats are starting to fight fire with fire. And by doing that, you might burn the whole place down, but you also could do very, very well. And it could also set you up for future victories. And it's exactly what we've seen with national Democrats. So looking at the post-Dobbs average as well, again, I wanted to mention this because I think this is a great way to sort of end off our video on a note of what has this actually had an impact on our House elections. And you can see it to be true. We talked about the post and pre-Dobbs average in my video yesterday about special elections, how the post-Dobbs average, if applied to our House map, would give Democrats 250 seats in the House and 56 seats in the U.S. Senate. I mean, things like that are only possible in extreme cases where you could apply an average like that, but obviously that isn't going to be the case. But as we look at a lot of these post-Dobbs averages in terms of swing districts and competitive races and special elections, I begin to question at what point does our rhetoric change? Because it is very clearly established that the Dobbs decision changed everything. Even if the outcome is true that Republicans win control of the House, as we said, a year ago versus now, we still are standing by our expectation that Republicans do win control of the House. But what is to say, for instance, if that changes? And what is to say, too, that Dobbs, has even more of an impact than we think. Michigan will now have an abortion referendum on the ballot this November. California will as well. Many other states are contemplating it or will put it on future ballots and referenda. Because what it will do, at least in favor of the Democrats, is drive out turnout. And Republicans also, in a way, want to at least listen to the people on this topic. But after the Kansas results, if it doesn't exactly go their way, they're not super inclined to listen in that regard. The Republican Party championing the pro-life movement, championing the decision from the U.S. Supreme Court is not a popular stance. Never has been, never will be, because the American public is pro-choice on average. And I say that with full confidence. I do believe the post-Dobbs environment is significantly better for the Democratic Party, and this forecast is telling us that not only do Democrats have a viable chance of victory in 2022, but absolutely in 2024 and years beyond. This is not going to be a 2010 to 2018 type of circumstance, at least from what we have seen thus far. This is not going to be an environment in which the Republican Party is going to maintain control of the House for at least a decade, or at least almost a decade in this context. Because it's going to take a lot for these midterm elections, and quite frankly, it doesn't look like they have it. So keep an eye out on the Economist forecast, the 538 forecast, the generic ballot, President Biden's approval rating, the overall betting markets, because they tell us a story and they tell it with time. The Senate, the same way. Republicans were at 78 cents for a yes share, and now they're all the way down at just 36. So a super significant reduction has already happened in the Senate. What's to say it doesn't happen in the House? Keep a close eye out. Watch everything. Make sure that you're on top of things, because these races are going to change very, very quickly in the final stretch of the campaign season. With 60 days out, I will say that I do expect many races to change, our expectations to change as well. But the question is, where does that happen? And it's important that you're up to date on all of these races, because truly, a few races, the difference in The Economist and 538 could mean all the difference between the Democrats being in the majority and the Republicans winning it. So thank you guys so much for watching this video. Make sure to comment down suggestions below. Subscribe on the left if you haven't already, and check out the Instagram and Twitter. At the bottom left of the screen, there's also a Discord server if you go ahead and join. On the screen, there's a video you can watch, and then a playlist for my 2022 midterm election analysis videos. Again, thank you guys so much for watching, and I will see you all later today.